Hey, good morning, all. Joshua Severe Weather. Happy Tuesday morning to you. I'm a meteorologist in the Raleigh area, and I have been a meteorologist for over 20 years. Been on YouTube since December, and I am going to give you my analysis here of the future of now Hurricane Idalia, as well as talk a little bit more about Hurricane Franklin and also Typhoon Saola in the Western Pacific. But most of this video is going to talk about the impacts to Florida and the Southeast here in the coming days. A very dangerous situation setting up with yet another storm traversing some very warm ocean waters off the coast of Florida. And those of you in Florida that have been through some major hurricanes lately know that you can't take any hurricane lightly, but this one's got the chance of becoming yet another historic storm. There is a lot of uncertainty once we get on past tomorrow. I'm going to talk some about that, but I'm going to focus a lot of this on impacts here in the next couple of days here in the state of Florida in the Southeast. And the official forecast does take Hurricane Idalia into the Big Bend area as a Category 3 storm. I personally think there's enough fuel in place for it to briefly become a Category 4. Regardless, it's going to be a powerful storm. Don't get obsessed with the category so much as maybe the size of the storm, the speed that it's moving in, and how it looks on radar and on satellite. But we do have a storm that is building an inner core. It is now getting ready to move over some of the warmest waters in the tropics, and wind shear is relaxing. That is allowing the storm to grow in size and grow in strength. And I do believe once we get into late this morning, and especially this afternoon, tonight, and first thing tomorrow, we are going to see a period of rapid intensification, allowing our storm to grow and to develop some very strong winds inside the center. So right now, I am forecasting that it does touch Category 4. Even if it stays a high 3, that's not a terrible forecast in my opinion. But nonetheless, it is going to be a major hurricane when it moves up into the Big Bend tomorrow morning. After that, the storm is expected to bend to the right. It's going to bring some heavy rain and some strong winds up the Carolina coastline. And after that, there is weakening steering currents, which will allow the storm to stall and maybe even loop back towards the southeast. But that part is a lot more uncertain. I do think if that happens, there is a window for it to strengthen again next week after Labor Day, but not necessarily hitting again as a hurricane, but strengthening briefly over some warm loop current waters here, or not loop current, but Gulf Stream waters here east of Florida. But this is just my forecast, and I do expect this half of it to change more significantly than this portion as the level of certainty does continue to lessen at that point. Beyond Hurricane Idalia, we do have Hurricane Franklin, a very powerful storm, which will be passing northwest of Bermuda here later tomorrow and staying southeast of Canada Thursday and Friday, and then heading away. Not a threat to any major land masses. We do have a couple of areas of interest. 92L is something that's been off and on as a disturbance, but probably not any kind of threat to land. And then another system which has a better chance of becoming our next named storm, Jose, but again, no threat to land once it moves out past the Cape Verde. So we're not going to talk too much about those, but I will show them to you. But this is something very rare on the internet. Interesting ad. Something very rare to see two hurricanes so close to each other, so close to Florida. We've seen multiple hurricanes on the map before at the same time, but if Idalia becomes a major hurricane tonight and Franklin stays a major hurricane, it's going to be a very rare occurrence to see two major hurricanes in the same part of the basin at the same time. So we are kind of in unprecedented times here, and unfortunately. The National Hurricane Center track takes the storm into the eastern Big Bend. I am going to show you models which show that there's some trend back to the west a little bit more as more model data is coming in from flights that have been done over the storm, not just the storm itself, not just recon into the storm, but recon surrounding the storm, taking a look at the upper air environment to figure out where this system may eventually go. So if you're on the western side of this, close to Tallahassee, you very well could still have a direct hit. It does look like Tampa Bay area is going to avoid the direct hit from this storm. It's going to stay a little bit too far offshore. However, the strengthening and growing size of the storm tonight is going to bring some very rough surf and some very rough wind into the Tampa Bay area. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here. You can see the National Hurricane Center has a tropical storm Sunday, and you can see it starting that loop. A couple models earlier showed it looping south of Bermuda. Now they're showing that loop very close to where Franklin is now. The good news, I guess, if you want to call it good news, is that Franklin is such a big storm. It's a strong Category 4 hurricane that it's cooling off the water here. So the chance of this developing quickly in here is very low. But when it gets down into here, if it does, it certainly does have a better chance to try to make a comeback here. So I don't want to put the cart before the horse before talking about the horse, but that is something I'm going to be watching for you guys as well. Hurricane Franklin rapidly intensified this time yesterday, well above what any of the models showed, and it actually had a central pressure in the 920s, which is a high-end Category 4. That is actually a record low amount of central pressure, so record high intensity this far north in the Atlantic Basin. We have never seen a storm, at least since modern records have been kept since the 70s, that has gotten as deep and as low in pressure as this one so far to the north. Dorian, if you remember, down in here in 2019, around the same time of year, did get that deep. It actually went even deeper and was a major catastrophe for the Bahamas. But this system was actually about 400 miles northeast of that when it got that strong. So very unusual. But the good news, aside from some tropical storm conditions in Bermuda, it is going to be just eating up the shipping lanes of the North Atlantic, producing some rough surf here in Newfoundland as we get into Friday, but passing south and east of the Avalon Peninsula. Aside from that, here's the area that we're going to be watching, 92L, not a threat to land, and then our next wave coming off of Africa, we'll talk about here in just a little bit. This is the water vapor imagery. It takes a look at the moisture in the upper atmosphere, and you can see very clearly just a few storms on the map, but a couple of major ones. I'm not laughing. This is a serious situation, but yeah, this is crazy times that we're in right now. This is Hurricane Idalia, Category 1 and growing. This is Category 4 Hurricane Franklin, which has met its peak, and that is going to move off into this direction. Idalia is going to continue moving north today and then starting to bend to the right and then out to sea near the Carolinas. We have an upper level low right here in the central Atlantic, upper level low down here, and in between the two, a fighting tropical disturbance. And then south and east of these storms, a big region of high pressure in place here, and that is going to protect the central and eastern Caribbean from any activity. Also a pretty big high pressure ridge here over the western Gulf, so still very hot across Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And in between Hurricane Idalia and Hurricane Franklin, it's tough to see, but there is still a very tiny ridge of high pressure, a subtropical high that's kind of wedged into here. And the good news is that that is what's going to protect the southwestern part of Florida from seeing a direct hit. Not going to mean you're not going to have impacts if you're south of Tampa, but because that ridge is in place over here and kind of up into here, actually, this is kind of the shape of the ridge, it is going to kind of go around it. We're going to talk about this trough and the timing of it and how that's going to impact the future of Idalia. And then out west, we do have another trough in the northwest, but you see this huge area of high pressure. This is going to build back into the United States behind the trough. And when we get to about Labor Day weekend and beyond, we're going to see another heat wave over the interior of the West and then building east into the Great Lakes next week and then into the Northeast later next week because of this huge dome of high pressure. It never really went away. It just kind of reshaped itself. And unfortunately, that is going to be something that we have to watch when we're talking about the future of these tropical systems. A ridge of high pressure is going to block things, and we don't want to see blocking. We want storms to move away quickly as fast as they can. Unfortunately, the block could be setting up here in the next couple of weeks. Tropical Storm Irwin in the Pacific moving away, and that should weaken as it reaches some drier, cooler, more stable air in the Pacific. So we're not going to talk about that one here. Closer to home here, you can see Idalia growing in intensity and strength, now a hurricane Category 1. The biggest thing that you can see on this map here, actually a couple big items of importance here, that the storm is starting to finally grow on the northern and western side. It's still got a little bit of wind shear to deal with here, a little bit of dry air coming in from the west, but that has lessened some versus this time yesterday. That wind shear is lessening, and even a small amount of wind shear is not going to keep a storm like this from strengthening over very warm water. In fact, it's going to do very little here in the next 24 hours. We are going to see the warm water winning this battle across over the wind shear, and as a result, we're going to see the size grow, especially on the eastern and southeastern side here. So we're going to see a bigger storm by this time tomorrow with a bigger impact showing up across Florida, bigger envelope. And behind it, you can see there's a bit of southerly wind shear, which is actually going to favor this system because the wind shear is actually going to line up with the forward motion here. And if anything, that's just going to lead to a bigger ribbon of moisture behind it. So South Florida, you are going to see additional rain on the backside of the system tomorrow and into Thursday as well as the system grows. Now, there's enough spacing here between Idalia and Franklin so that the two storms are not going to interact with each other. This one's actually going to get lifted out by a trough, and it's going to accelerate. This one, because there's a ridge of high pressure in between the two, is going to keep enough of a distance away so that the two storms are not really going to impact each other, which is not the news, of course, we want to hear. We want to see them fighting with each other and beating each other up, but unfortunately, that doesn't look to be the case. We've got something else going on here, not related to the tropics, but unfortunately, a big story for those of us here in the mid-Atlantic states and into the interior of the Southeast. We have a frontal boundary that's pretty much stalled and a lot of deep tropical moisture. It's very humid here in this region, and some significant rain popping up here well ahead of the system along this boundary. We could have some flash flooding across North Georgia this morning, the Western Carolinas into Virginia again. This boundary needs to be watched, probably not for severe weather, but for very slow-moving storms with a lot of significant rain. Until this trough here in the Northeast gives it enough of a kick, it is going to produce some widespread heavy amounts of rain and some flash flooding in the mountain areas. So we have definitely that to be watching here, which has nothing really to do with the hurricanes, but the hurricanes are unfortunately keeping that front stalled as it continues to just kind of sit and drench parts of the mid-Atlantic. Farther out in the East Atlantic, a couple of waves we're keeping an eye on. One of these could become Jose, but they are not going to be a threat to the United States. All right, so why are things expected to strengthen so quickly? Well, this is why. Water temperatures in the Eastern Gulf are running 30 to 32 degrees Celsius, which is between 86 and 90 Fahrenheit. This is above the average by 1 to 3 degrees Celsius, so about 2 to 4 degrees, maybe 5 degrees Fahrenheit above average. Unfortunately, the end of August, beginning of September is the time of the year when the Gulf of Mexico waters typically peak in warmth, and we are already running a couple degrees above that. So take your average season where storms already can rapidly intensify, then tack on a couple degrees, and there is additional storm fuel in place. And that is also the case here in the southwestern Atlantic. That is why Franklin strengthened so quickly yesterday. Franklin went from basically a Category 2 here on Sunday to a high-end Category 4 yesterday. So rapid intensification across this region right here where Franklin crossed. Well, guess what? This area over here has got water that's not even this warm, but warmer by a degree or two. The only difference, I think, this time is that at the end of the storm's track over the water, we are going to see some wind shear kicking in. But at that point, the storm will have already grown, in my opinion. So I'm going to show you what this has to do with intensity forecasts and what we've seen, the trends that are kind of disturbing to me just a little bit here. This is from the University of Miami Oceanic Heat Content. The surface waters are important, but seeing how deep that warm water is equally important to making an intensity forecast. And you can see that Idalia is going to move right over this very deep area of high ocean heat content. It already was over it somewhat here before it went over the tip of Cuba last night, but very, very large amount of fuel source in place here for this storm to strengthen. You can see now that storm is growing. This is Idalia. You can see this is a loop back. You can see it fired up some pretty cold thunderstorm tops, and then those fizzled a little bit and then re-flared up here last night. And now the storm is moving over and just past the western tip of Cuba. I'm going to show you the radar, and you'll be able to see that there is a core that is developing inside of it. And you can see just the last couple of frames here where the system is beginning to generate some very cold thunderstorm tops here, and we're going to start to see this grow on the western side here. If you take a look at the Cuba radar, you can see there is now an eye on the radar. That's typically a sign that the center of the storm is starting to warm up. We're starting to see some growth in the storm, and we are seeing more of a core forming here. So it's taken a little bit more time than maybe you might have expected. That was due to the wind shear from the north yesterday, but it is happening now. And as the storm continues to grow this healthy core here, you can see this is the central part of the system. Here is that core that is starting to wrap around on the northwest side. As it does that later this morning, the storm will then have the framework for a healthy storm that can grow very quickly. And I think that is going to happen by the time it gets up into here later in the day today. We're going to see a very quick drop in surface pressure. As a result, the surface winds are going to increase. And while we have a minimal Category 1 storm now, it should be a Category 2 later today. And I think tonight has the opportunity to go quickly through Category 3, possibly up to Category 4, before a little bit of weakening right at landfall. The National Hurricane Center has that landfall tomorrow morning on the Big Bend here. I think we're going to see a bit of a shift just to the west here a little bit more, maybe even getting over 85 west here or staying at 85 west a little longer before coming up in this direction. But don't focus on the exact track because this is a large and growing storm. That's why we have hurricane warnings all the way back here to Apalachicola, all the way down through the Tampa Bay area, down to Longboat Key, I believe, and then tropical storm warnings all the way down the southwest coast of Florida until we get into Monroe County. And we still have hurricane warnings for western Cuba, although I think most of that hurricane force wind stays just off of the coast here in the next few hours and then begins to relax. Farther up the east coast of Florida, we could see tropical storm conditions as this storm grows in width. We could see tropical storm winds across much of the Treasure Coast, the Space Coast, and the First Coast, and getting into Georgia as well. Tropical storm watches further up the coast, right through the low country of South Carolina. I think these are going to be eventually extended northward, perhaps all the way up through the Outer Banks here, as we are looking at potentially a tropical storm coming off the coast here. It'll be a much weaker storm, but one that is going to slow down and sit over some warm water. So in the Outer Banks, we could have some problems here as well later on Thursday into Friday. Here's the area of potential hurricane force wind. You can see there is a slight chance it could even still get to that wind speed near Jacksonville and all the way up into Berkeley County and Georgetown County in South Carolina. Just a small chance of hurricane conditions, a greater chance of strong tropical storm force winds. In fact, Charleston Harbor, that area, Beaufort County, Hilton Head, could see wind gusts over 60 miles per hour out of this storm, and a larger area, potentially tropical storm force winds, even all the way back to the western panhandle, southeastern Alabama. We could briefly have tropical storm force winds, a very high chance of that over southeast Georgia, over the low country of South Carolina, and somewhat of a chance here across the entire North Carolina coast, especially south of Hatteras. So we are going to see a lot of areas getting impacted by the storm. Let's talk about the possible track. And you can see it is starting to shift back to the west, more into the Big Bend. I still think Taylor County is probably going to see the eye wall come through it, but we see a bit of an enhanced risk to Jefferson County, to Wakulla County, and even back to Apalachicola. Here's the county map here. Even Franklin County could get hit directly, although I think probably it favors this area here. Wakulla County, Leon County, Jefferson, Taylor, Madison, maybe Dixie and Lafayette counties in Florida all have the risk of seeing powerful winds out of this storm. And this is a very vulnerable part of the Florida coastline because it's concave. Water can come up in here and pile up more than it can in other parts of the Florida coast because of the fact that the coast bends away. So we are going to see some significant storm surge out of this. Again, this is going to come out here probably on Thursday afternoon or Thursday night, somewhere near Southport and Bald Head Island. After that, we are seeing a slowing of forward motion. We're going to see more time here over the Western Atlantic. Fortunately, the waters are cooler than they were before Franklin came through. Unfortunately, though, weak steering currents are going to lead to a very uncertain forecast. The GFS has been leading the charge on this, taking a clockwise loop back towards perhaps the coast of Florida or somewhere in here. It's showing that run after run after run here since this time yesterday. The other models are starting to kind of trend in that direction, and there's still an equal chance that this could continue to pull away and follow the other system, Franklin, here over the North Atlantic. Here's the intensity forecast. Most of our models show at least a Category 2 here by tonight. Several show it rapidly intensifying up to Category 3. I'm predicting a low-end Category 4. Why am I doing this? Because these models have very low skill in picking up on rapid intensification. No storm was strong enough with Ida. No storm was strong enough with Michael. No model was strong enough with Ian. All of them underperformed when it came to intensification. And the reason why is when you get that wind shear down below 10, 15 knots, you go over warm waters, the models do their best, but they just can't quite get to that rate of intensification. We saw that yesterday with Franklin. None of the forecast models had it getting as strong as it did in just 12 hours, but it was 20 knots higher than the nearest model. Could that happen with Idalia? I think it's certainly possible, but I'm not going too high. I'm not going Category 5, but I do think it could get to Category 4. Even if it's a high-end Category 3, it's still going to be a huge problem for Florida. So don't get obsessed over that category. Just know that the storm is going to grow. It's going to intensify quickly. What it looks like now is going to be nothing compared to what it looks like tomorrow. We have a big flood risk as the storm begins to slow down here in the Carolinas. We also have a flood risk with our stalled front over the Mid-Atlantic region in the Central Appalachians and the Southern Appalachians, East Tennessee, West Virginia, and even the Tidewater of Virginia, including Raleigh. do have a risk for some flash flooding. And some of that will happen today in the mountains. Some of that will happen tonight near the Big Bend. And then most of it happens tomorrow along the coastal plain, ending on Friday morning. We have a storm surge forecast that continues to climb 8 to 12 feet over the eastern Big Bend and the Nature Coast. 12 feet of storm surge would be halfway up to your second floor if you're on the coast. So you should have already evacuated at this point if you're anywhere in this red zone. 6 to 9 feet over the Citrus Coast. You get to the Tampa Bay, it's not low. 4 to 7 feet of storm surge is enough to go over somebody's head. And that water can surge right into the inner bays here, into the back bay as well. Places like Oldsmar. I know Mike's weather page has been talking about that a lot. He lives in Oldsmar. Definitely at risk at seeing storm surge flooding, and even flooding down into Charlotte Harbor and in the same places that are still slowly rebuilding from Hurricane Ian. Unfortunately, some of you will be back underwater again, although not to the intensity that your neighbors to the north will be. And then on the east side here, we do have storm surge, which will likely hit the southeast coast here once we get into later tomorrow night and into Thursday. 2 to 4 feet could cause some flooding. Some of those houses on Hilton Head Island and Data Island, St. Helena Island, any of the other islands, Fripp Island, all could see some storm surge flooding out of this system. A very dangerous system. Let's look at the intensity real quick, and you will see we are going to continue to see a growing storm, a little bit of struggle on the western side, but it is going to fill in here at 21Z, which is 4 Central, 5 Eastern. You can see the wind field continues to grow and could do so very quickly. I think we see our quickest intensification between 5 o'clock tonight and 5 a.m. tomorrow morning, as this continues to go over the warmest waters of the Gulf, and wind shear continues to relax until we get to tomorrow morning. And you can see here we're looking at predictions of 125 to 130 or 135 mile per hour wind. The HAFS takes this system right up into the very high end of the Big Bend. So basically, right here at Jefferson and Taylor counties is where those strongest winds are expected. And then the storm will be weakening quickly, but still a core that will hold together east of Tallahassee into south central parts of Georgia, and then southeastern Georgia. And then as the system pulls away here, we could see gusty winds up the East Coast all the way into the Outer Banks on Thursday morning. And as the storm pulls away, we could see some intense winds on the backside in the Outer Banks. The HAFS-A model is showing wind gusts close to hurricane force. The B shows 45. I would take the average of the two and say 60 mile per hour wind gusts are possible across the Outer Banks from Cape Lookout to Cape Hatteras, and from 35 to 50 miles per hour from Cape Hatteras up to Duck and up to Kitty Hawk in those areas. And then as the storm moves away, it slows down, and we are left with a very challenging forecast once we get to this weekend. It will not be dead. It's going to be back over water for several more days, so we have to keep an eye on that. Here are the maximum wind gusts on the European. The European is not strong enough with the storm, but it does show where the highest winds go, right into Taylor County. And wind gusts to hurricane force here on the eastern part of the Big Bend and in the Nature Coast. Even gusts to 60 miles per hour in Pinellas County and 50 in Pasco County. And potentially higher if this storm gets stronger than the Euro shows, and I think that will be the case. And then you can see a second area of strong winds over coastal Georgia and northeastern Florida. We could even see gusts over 55 miles per hour in St. Augustine, and that will cause some damage. Farther off to the north and east, we can see strong winds over the eastern half of the Carolinas, and the European showing 75 mile per hour wind gusts possible on Cape Hatteras. Ocracoke, 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts. This could be damaging as well to the Outer Banks as the storm begins to intensify as it goes into the Gulf Stream and brings back those strong winds on the backside of this storm. So while we get the heavy rain on the front side, we could get the strong wind and the heavy rain on the backside here, with the time frame for that being Thursday afternoon, Thursday night, early Friday morning. Here's a look at what the HRRR shows as far as the predicted radar. And you can see we are going to have a few rain bands moving up into western Florida here later today, and a few showers and storms over the peninsula, but the storm is far enough off the coast on the HRRR model, and this could be a little too far west, by the way. I think it's going to end up being over here, but we see those bands of rain moving in here tonight, especially after midnight, and then the worst of the rain is going to be tomorrow morning across all of the eastern panhandle and the Big Bend. We'll see bands of showers and storms moving into southwest Florida. Some of these could produce brief tornadoes with them, and then we're very quickly going to see that heavy rain moving up into Georgia tomorrow morning into the Carolinas, and we could see a few tornadoes in the low country of South Carolina and Georgia here, and northeastern Florida here during the afternoon tomorrow. The NAM model is farther east, and that's the model, I guess that's kind of what I'm preferring at this point. You see it actually turns right into the concave part of the coast, hitting right at a 90-degree angle, the very worst possible situation you could have in this part of the world. And the strongest wind and rain are going to shift around to the western side of the eye here tomorrow afternoon. This is 2 to 4 p.m. And then continuing into South Carolina, I'm going to move my map over. And then you can see lots of tropical downpours right behind the center here on Thursday. We're going to see more heavy rain and gusty winds moving into southwestern Florida. Not so much the wind, but the rain. Total precipitation forecast here across this area. This is a blend of all the models. Through Labor Day weekend, we're seeing the likelihood of 8 to 12 inches of rain somewhere here in the central and eastern panhandle, and 5 to 6 inches of rain in parts of Georgia, maybe up to 8 inches somewhere in here as well. Even the southern peninsula could see a few inches of rain. Hopefully with less wind, that's going to be welcome for those of you that need that rain. But it is going to be a lot of rain coming in just a short amount of time. Farther up, you see the heavy rainfall today and tonight over northern Georgia, western North Carolina, and then you see the main action here coming up through the Piedmont and the coastal plains of the Carolinas, with amounts likely to get up to 2 to 4 inches, locally higher amounts here in the low country, maybe 6 to 8 inches. Now, the future of the storm, this is where things get kind of muddy here. This is Franklin right here getting picked up by this trough right here. Then here comes Idalia here tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow night. This trough is going to be moving very quickly, and in its wake, you see this high pressure region building in. What's going to happen is Idalia is now projected to miss this trough, but there is a piece of the trough that will be splitting back into the western Atlantic. At the same time, high pressure builds in here on Friday and Saturday, so it's going to warm up very quickly here in eastern Canada and the Great Lakes. What happens here is, unfortunately, the storm doesn't just get picked up like Franklin does by this trough, because what's happening is we've got this high pressure ridge building back in, and underneath it, a little bit of a weakness left over. Where that weakness ends up going is going to be critical in the future of our storm. The GFS shows it down in here. The Euro shows it up in here. Either way, as this ridge builds east, we are now going to have a block in place where the storm can no longer move in this direction. What will happen is it's going to get stuck somewhere in here between North Carolina and Bermuda. The GFS takes it and loops it back in this direction. The Euro slows it in this direction. Other models are trending in this direction as well. Either way, while the waters aren't as warm as they were before Franklin, they are warm. And if the wind shear relaxes and this ridge builds in, we could see another period of intensification in here. But it is way too soon to make any call on that right now. Obviously, I'm showing on my map here that possibility that it could, if it sits over here long enough, become a hurricane again, at least a strong tropical storm. I don't think it's going to be a category 3 or 4, but something we have to watch as it loops back into this area. And right now, that could put the east coast of Florida at risk later next week. It could also put the southeast coast at risk, or it could just stay out here and loop around and eventually go back out to sea after that ridge weakens and the next trough pushes it away. There's just way too much uncertainty at this point to make any kind of call. You'll see here the ensembles have very good agreement taking it into the Big Bend here. And then we've got some divergence in the tracks here on Friday morning, where some of the models are going right past where Franklin goes. Other models are taking it back here west of Bermuda. I say models, these are ensembles. And then several ensembles take it right back here towards the Bahamas or stall it in this direction. It will not be as strong a storm at this point, but if it sits over these warmer waters in here, I do think it could overachieve again and has a small chance of becoming a hurricane or at least a strong tropical storm. And unfortunately, there are some solutions that take this back into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, which is the last place we want to see anything at this point. Others kind of loop it into this area and either kill it or turn it back up into the Carolinas. So this is the GFS ensemble, and just way too much uncertainty, of course, at this point. Taking a look at other models, or taking a look real quick at the European ensemble. Let's see if I can find that. Here we go. European ensemble from Weather Nerds. And just give it a few seconds to load here. Apologize, I didn't pull this up earlier, just too much to look at. But taking a look here, let me stop this. Taking a look here at the European, you also see that bend back here and the beginnings of a loop. And possibly a threat to the Bahamas, possibly a threat to Bermuda, possibly coming back here towards the southeast. Again, we just don't really know at this point. Franklin, very big storm. You can see how quickly it rapidly intensified yesterday to close to Category 5 strength. It was a strong Category 4. Unfortunately, we didn't have a plane in there when I think it got to its strongest, but the last plane that left had the pressure down to 926. The plane that went in last night showed that it did start to weaken a little bit. And you can see on the last few frames here, let me just move it along here for you. You can see on the last few frames, there was an eye wall replacement cycle, and a bit of degradation here. We're going to see actually a bigger eye come out of this here, but because of that, we're going to have a weaker storm system. But only going to be brushing Bermuda, just a tropical storm watch. It's going far enough to the north, and will probably weaken below major hurricane intensity here by tomorrow afternoon as a Category 2, and then a Category 1 as it tracks well to the south and east of Newfoundland, and then up towards Iceland. Here you see the hurricane force probabilities are now too low for Bermuda, so this is nice. The European a couple days ago showed it would be a bigger threat. The 50-knot wind speed probability is still fairly low for Bermuda, but there is a decent chance of tropical storm force winds, especially on the northern and western side of the island. Models all agree it's now going to go about 250 miles north of Bermuda. Only one model shows it being potentially a threat to Newfoundland. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to see it well out to sea here. And here's the intensity forecast dropping down to Category 3 this afternoon, and likely down below major strength here by the time we get to Wednesday night, Thursday morning, and remaining a hurricane but becoming extratropical by the end of this week. Here's a look at Franklin. The pressures are a little too low on this, but you can see pressures come up into the 950s here tomorrow, and then 960s on Thursday, and then 970s on Friday. Still a hurricane, but a much weaker hurricane. You can see that eye wall replacement is going to cause the structure to collapse a bit, but we're still going to have a large eye in place here, and that wind field expands. This is Bermuda here, and you can see 26 mile per hour wind gusts is all that it's projecting on the eastern side, but I think we could have 40 to 50 mile per hour winds possibly. But that storm is going to grow. It's going to lose its inner core and become extratropical here by Friday and Friday night. We also have a major Typhoon Saola with winds of 140 miles per hour. And this system has gone through some cycling, as you can imagine, but has been battering the northeastern part of Luzon in the Philippines. The same area got hit hard here just about 6 weeks ago, but a massive eye in place, and it is poised to strengthen here. The good news, if you want to call it that, is that the forecast models have shifted south and no longer show a direct hit on Taiwan. But the bad news is that we're going to have a violent typhoon here, and making it closer to China here, close to Hong Kong as a strong typhoon. We are going to see a big flooding event for southern Taiwan, for northeastern Luzon, and for southern China. You see it actually peaks in intensity here in the South China Sea on Thursday night and Friday, and then weakens before making landfall in China. The European says we'll try to bend back here. The other models go in this direction. Either way, strong winds coming, mainly for the coastal waters in between the Philippines, Taiwan, and China. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed day. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends. I know it's very technical. This video is longer than what you typically would have. I'm going to do another video tonight, just strictly talking about Idalia, nothing else. And that will be up here sometime in the evening hours with updates, as I do expect Idalia to start strengthening very quickly. It'll probably be a Category 2 when I do the video tonight. It's possible it could even get close to Category 3. We're going to be watching it like a hawk here today. I do have a membership channel. If you would like a faster response, if you would like more tailored forecasts, or just would like to support me and as I grow this channel, then I encourage you to do so. Less than $10 a month or 33 cents a day. I am a Christian. I give all the glory to God, who gives me this gift to help protect lives and share with you all important forecast information. I cannot do it without God. He created me. God is my refuge and my strength. Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters therefore roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof, there is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. We are all going through storms in our life. We're all going through challenges. Those of you in Florida are about to go through another hurricane. My thoughts and prayers are with you guys. I can't even imagine. I've been through one hurricane in my lifetime. I can't imagine doing it again and again. But what I will say is, no matter what happens here on earth, there is a mighty God that we serve. He is our refuge and our strength. He brought Jesus Christ to die on the cross so that we could live eternally in the city of God, the holy place of tabernacles of the Most High. We only get on average 70, 80 years on earth, but we get an eternity to live with Jesus in heaven. And I pray that you can seek Jesus Christ like I did 10 years ago, to see that God is here to help us out in this difficult time, and just to see the light at the end of the tunnel, the silver lining in what is a difficult time for all of us. I'm happy to pray for you. Prayers, which whether or not you want to list them or just say unspoken prayers, I will pray for you, and I'll have others praying for you as well, because we all need to pray and we all need to repent and turn to God and realize that no matter what happens here on earth, that there is a mighty God here to serve us, and he is here to deliver us through these difficult times. I hope you all have a wonderful day. We'll talk again tonight. God bless you.